Please, this is your chance to tell us everything you think we need to know.
Well, thank you, Senators, for seeing me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So I am an aquatic ecologist by profession, and I have over 25 years' experience working as an aquatic ecologist, largely in the rivers, streams and wetlands of Queensland. In this capacity, I have some concerns about potential plans to use carp herpes virus, cyprinid herpes virus 3 as a biological control agent for carp in Australia. Over my career, one of my foci for research has been the ecology of intermittent dryland rivers of southern inland Queensland and northern New South Wales, and I think these are of particular concern with respect to the carp herpes virus. These concerns that I have can be summarised into three main themes. Firstly, there is uncertainty around the efficacy of the virus as a biocontrol agent. Secondly, there is uncertainty and a lack of knowledge of the actual benefits that carp biocontrol would grant to native freshwater biodiversity in Australia. And thirdly, there is uncertainty concerning the actual risks of unintended impacts from release of a virus such as this. Now, I've provided you with written material outlining some of these issues in a little detail, and of course I'm happy to discuss those with you today.
Sorry, Dr. Marshall, for the benefit of the committee and others, this was supplied to us just earlier. So are you happy to table that so we can refer to that document and we can put it out there in the public arena?
Yes, I am. Thank you,
thanks,
Senator.
Dr. Marshall. Carry on.
So overall, the main point that I'd like to make today is that I don't think we actually need to rush into this decision about whether to use the virus or not. There's a big tendency to think that if we don't act now, things are going to get worse. But it's important to realise that where they may exist, the impacts that carp have on Australian native biodiversity are relatively static. Carp having expanded into its major current range decades ago. In other words, the problem isn't worsening. Likewise, I believe the potential of the herpes virus to act as a biocontrol solution would not diminish if the decision timeframes were extended. So in a nutshell, there's no rush. We have time to better understand the problem and to arrive at a good science-based decision. Large and complex problems such as this require a large investment and sufficient time for the science to be conducted to a satisfactory level. Releasing a virus into Australia is an irreversible act, and while the benefits could indeed be tremendous, the potential for unintended harm can also be quite large. The problem is we just don't know which way this will go. In my view, the magnitude and the uncertainties and the risks around this situation warrant a longer-term research program beyond the current National Carp Control Plan commitments. Otherwise, any decision made to either release or not release the virus would be made under a heavy shroud of scientific uncertainty. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Marshall. Look, just quickly browsing over who are we on the document you supply, we've got some pretty serious heavy hitters here. Why aren't you at the table? Oh, okay. Oh, you're coming in after? Yeah. Oh, you are coming to the table. Oh, that's great. All right, tremendous. Fantastic.
If anyone wanted to make a short opening statement, yeah, all right, Mr. Falconer.
Sorry, mate. Here's Dr. Mr. Holman is the one that mentioned of the botula. You might want to ask it. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Botulism, mate.
As a group of scientists and citizens, we're deeply concerned by the proposal to use the carp herpes virus to control Australia's most prolific aquatic pest. We support the concept of a national plan to address the problem. Carp within the Murray-Darling Basin are now at densities 25 to 75 times higher than peak rabbit populations. We owe it to our children to minimise the impact of this species. That said, we must do so in a manner that does not risk more dangerous and unpredictable issues. Unfortunately, the politicisation of the Murray-Darling Basin seems to have impacted on the scoping and operation of this project. While the impacts will be felt throughout Australia, the majority of any potential risks would be delivered, to any potential benefits would be delivered to upstream water users, while the majority of risks fall to those living in downstream communities, people already heavily impacted by disruption to our rivers, the lakes and the Coorong. Presentations by the NCCP team encourage listeners to believe that removing carp might restore macrophyte, turbidity and native fish levels to where they were in the 1920s, a time before river regulation, and this doesn't help with the public discourse. There are numerous research papers and historical records that clearly demonstrate these indicators were in decline long before widespread carp infestation. Early indication by cotton industry lobbyists that carp control will result in a reduction in the need for environmental flows is also tainting the public discourse. Any responsible plan must weigh real risks against realistic benefits. It's critical to recognise that the scientists presenting here today are not alone. There's a significant level of concern across the community. Recent polling across 99 community groups demonstrated 76% opposition to the release of the carp herpes virus. A follow-up poll showed that 84% of those polled supported carp control where the virus is not used. It is also important to recognise that my colleagues and Dr. Leighton have taken a significant economic, professional and reputational risk, particularly those of us who still work within the natural resources sector. It's not something that we do lightly, given ongoing attempts to discredit opposition voices. We believe it is critically important that facts and relevant research rather than opinion dominate this debate. Design of a plan around a predetermined solution is poor scientific, policy and business practice. It leads to planners asking the wrong questions and indulging in selective use of science to justify, in this case, the use of a high-risk, irreversible and unpredictable biocontrol. The current published proposal not to release the NCCP's own research reports until after public consultation has been concluded is also poor form. The CSIRO research used to define the scope of the NCCP appears to contain a number of technical oversights, leading to the development of conclusions that do not appear to be supported by the body of work described. We are happy to discuss these issues with you further in questions. While the current strain of the virus does not present a direct risk of infection to human hosts, the risk from secondary infection appears high and potentially recurring, and this includes a number of third world waterborne diseases, including botulism, Aeromonas, poisoning from cyanobacterial toxins, and life-threatening impacts from hemorrhagic E. coli. The risks are not limited to infection or viral mutation. Knockdown controls used in water bodies always present a significant environmental risk with a pest in these densities. Recent discussion has suggested that cleanup might be restricted to a small percentage of affected waterways. Using the estimate of killing 80% of 2 million tonnes, the simplest wastewater treatment calculations suggest that we could see a biochemical oxygen demand resembling that of poor quality secondary treated sewerage for all of the waters in the Murray-Darling Basin. If we saw these levels, the rotting fish would consume more than 4 times the available dissolved oxygen in the water, with lethal impacts for other organisms sharing the water body. The suggestion that we might look to perform cleanup for only a small portion of priority areas presents very real dangers for total ecosystem loss. To have any chance of keeping nutrients within the ANZAC guidelines without considering the already degraded state of the basin, 50 to 90% of carp biomass would need to be removed within 48 hours of death. Practical considerations and logistics render that prospect all but impossible. From an ecological perspective, the use of knockdown biocontrol is a crude, symptomatic solution that overlooks safer, potentially more effective options in favour of lower startup costs. In the last few years, and indeed the last couple months, there's been significant improvements in our understanding of the Murray-Darling Basin, suggesting far more effective and safer solutions, even while maintaining current levels of irrigation and water use. These solutions, used in conjunction with manual removal of live carp and more sophisticated approaches such as single-gender genetic technologies, could mean that we don't have to use an approach that carries such massive ecological and health risks. Rather than an approach requiring highways of trucks filled with rotting fish and producing a river not fit for drinking or recreational use, we could choose approaches that will leave our children with better waterways. Those waterways would maintain significantly reduced carp populations forever, and that's something that a viral biocontrol simply can't deliver.